Hi, nice to see you, nice to meet you. It's my pleasure to be invited by Tbilisi Museum of Photography and Multimedia for the series talking about books, which I'm a very big fan of. And as a medium, I'm myself a photographer, which big part of my career I devoted for long-term projects, which already when started had in mind finishing as a book. Here I'll talk about my second project, which I did on Ukraine, which was published 2019. After the first, which was devoted to South Caucasus, I worked 10 years on. This one is a little bit shorter. It's work from around 4 to 5 years, starting at the very end of the Revolution of Dignity in Kiev, Ukraine, and kind of carrying the viewer through the next 4 years, through the first 4 years of changes of everyday life, of war in Donbass and Crimea being taken by Russia, and how that affects not just the country but individual people. Because at my work I have I would say around 10 characters, main people with whom I stay in contact till today, actually, whom I follow, return to, just to see how their life is changing as Ukraine was changing. The idea of the book was the pain, but it's about Ukraine. But in my story, I, making a story about something so huge as a country like Ukraine, I come up with the idea. Then I will focus my story around the river Dnieper, which is a main river. Not so much maybe marking like often rivers do the border of the country, but it's more like an artery in a very central part of the Ukraine. It's in a national anthem, and it's in very places. So it's I treated this as a line of reference. It is not about the river. River is a point of return, and also a point of departure from where I explore geography, history, the East-West dynamic of Ukraine. When I published the book, there was an idea, you see in the cover, there's actually soldiers from Cherkasy who in 2014 volunteered, and I photographed him returning from the front line a year later. He's holding his daughter, and I also had this idea of having the kind of a silhouette shape of the river Dnieper on the cover. And inside, the idea was to, I just have a problem, then I start writing more and more, and every time I promise myself my next book will be pure photography. No writing, but this one is apogeum of my writing. So it's actually 10 reportages here, which covers different topics, different aspects of the change Ukraine went through regarding religion, regarding their attitudes to the communist past, and so on. But it's kind of told through the people, as I said, I met. And in this part, they are mostly photos of my heroes, while this part is the photographs, just purely photographs. So these photographs, they have just some basic description, but also you can find more about the context of the photo, about the story behind that. Sometimes it's literal connected to the very photograph. Sometimes it is a story telling a bigger picture of certain things, which were important for many people in Ukraine. So this is kind of this idea. Then two sides will interact, and this is the viewer who can do it but doesn't have to do it. It's always like that. What else I can say? Thing is the book I thought in 2019 is finished. It's not like a war ever finished. This the Donbass issue or Crimea were solved. I was still going on, and actually up to January 2022, estimated 13,000 soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, died defending the eastern, the eastern part of Ukraine. against the Russian and Russia-backed separatist, aggression. Nevertheless, I thought it's done, the book is done. And in 2022, with the full-scale war, which started, I was actually in Ukraine, because for a couple of years I didn't go there, and I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna go. There was a French magazine to do my portfolio, and I said, okay, I'm gonna go for anniversary of Heavenly 100, which is February 19 and 20, and it's dedicated to this kind of a little bit over 100 people which were killed by government forces during the Revolution of Dignity, of the peak on those days, 1920. And that's it. In 2022, I'm just continuing, unfortunately. In introduction to my book, I quote Gogol, which was the Russian. He's known as a Russian writer, but he was a writer of Ukrainian origin, and I think his life represents very much this kind of how Russia, which conquers these areas like in Georgia now, in Ukraine today, how they're operating, how people were. To make a career, it has to go through Moscow, through the center. So you have to drop your real identity. Like Gogol, when he wrote The Dead Souls, he was accused by a lot of Russians intellectuals, like, how dare you write such bad things about Russia and things like this. And Gogol was like, no, it's like part of the trilogy, or, I have a big plan, and by the third one, I'm going to write all good stuff, He never, of course, wrote anything. There's even, I think, no trace of this. But I love him because he represents this duality of existing in this huge Russian empire, which we still, I think, all suffering from now, because it's all wrapped in a big culture and stuff, then it's the positive image is being sold, and not much is being taught about this destruction. Then people were like, he was collecting the Ukrainian dumki, which is the little songs, and he had the small performance in Russia for his friends, So he was living a really double life. So I quote in my book, I quote him. I call him Mykola in the breaks Nikolai, because his Ukrainian spelling name and the Russian equivalent. In his essay, he said that the much in history is decided by geography. And as my book was about the river a little bit, I wrote that it's like not anymore. In the modern times, it doesn't apply anymore. But when you look now again, even when I was in Dnipro when the war started, first thing I checked, I was on what side of the Dnipro River I was, if the Russians were going to destroy the bridges. So in a sense, Dnipro became like a soldier. The river Dnipro became like a soldier because the kind of the way the Russians do the war, it's very old-fashioned, very medieval. Geography matters again, because this is not some kind of technically advanced, invasion. It's just like throwing a bunch of as much metal as they can on Ukraine. So, in some sense, river become a soldiers, river become a line of defense. The bridges around Kherson are very important crossing, like the Russians couldn't cross even a small river in Severodonetsk. So, in the sense, it's like I stand by every word in this book, and the things I wrote, maybe against quantum geography, still matters, because in 22 the river Dnipro is some kind of soldier, I don't know, that's it. So, story continues. I feel I know Ukraine very well. I feel very strongly about Ukraine. I think Ukraine's fate is very much connected to Caucasus and Georgia, kind of on behalf of the so-called ex-Soviet republics, something we shouldn't be using anymore. But it's still somehow the negative leverage of the Soviet Union is somehow keeping those people from moving forward freely. So in a sense, Ukraine is like for all these places like Georgia, it's like in the forefront trying to for a final break away from that mold of the past. So that's my little book about that.